yes, no one is truly a subjectivist when crossing a busy street. You don't say, well, it's true for you that there's a semi truck barreling down the road, but not for me, and then proceed to cross the street. Everybody who claims to be a subjectivist is going to look both ways before crossing the street. And that's because it doesn't matter if they believe or not that there is a car coming. It's not true for just for them or just for somebody else that there's a car coming. And they'll soon find out that if they say that it's only true for you that a car is coming and they walk out into the street, they'll realize very quickly that that was also true for them. Hey, welcome back to Campfire Apologetics. Hold on, let me fix my camera. This is where I help the everyday Christian with tools to defend their faith in a hostile culture. My name is Mark Hudson, and today I am dragging. I am not all here right now. I know everybody has those days, but I don't know what's going on. I got up and I went to the gym and I felt pretty good. I came home and ate, and now I just feel off. I don't know. And I didn't eat anything strange. I ate all the same stuff I normally eat. So I don't know. I'm just not all there. So I apologize ahead of time if it seems that way. I'm trying not to be, or I'm trying not to come off that way. But um, today's episode, and of course, right, today's episode, I'm dealing with something pretty in depth. So hopefully my mind allows me to actually get through this and articulate it in a way that you all can benefit from it or understand it. But today's topic anyway is going to be really, it's going to be kind of three things. It's going to be about truth and knowledge and reality. And those are kind of the three topics that you'll find in philosophy or in philosophical studies if you've studied philosophy at all, which I'm not trying to come off as though I'm some kind of expert in philosophy, because I'm not. I have taken 0 courses in philosophy, but I've read some books on it, and I have watched quite a few lectures from philosophers and things of the sort. So I've studied it a little bit, but again, not enough to claim that I myself am some kind of prolific philosopher of any sort. But I remember one of the lectures I listened to from Reformed Theological Seminary by Dr. James Anderson, who I've had on the show. You should look that up. That was a great episode. I plan on hopefully having him on again in the future. And but in one of his lectures, he was kind of going through the three main categories, or I guess topics in philosophy, and they are metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And so what that breaks down is essentially is that metaphysics deals with questions about reality, like what actually is reality, what makes up reality, what is really real, what is meant by reality, and what grounds it. And then epistemology, you may be familiar with if you have listened to my channel for any period of time. I've talked about epistemology probably more than these, well, maybe not more than the other two, but I've talked about it quite a bit. Epistemology asks questions about knowledge. It's basically the theory of knowledge. How do you know what you know? How do you know that anything you know is actually true? How do you know anything at all? And then ethics deals with questions of how we should live. How ought we to live? What is right and wrong? what ought we do in certain situations, and so what is right and wrong, and what grounds right and wrong, what makes something right and wrong. So those are all things found in philosophical studies. Those are kind of the three main categories or topics within philosophy, and those three things, I personally felt that I had a better grasp or understanding of those after listening to this lecture by Dr. James Anderson. Now, I've mentioned it before, but if you don't have the Reformed Theological Seminary app, you should get it. It's free. And there's a lot of really awesome free resources on there. Lots of lectures, lots of different types of courses you can take. Maybe not courses, but a lot of different lectures you can listen to. Great information, lots of stuff you can take notes on. So um, I highly recommend it. But this episode is going to primarily deal with the first two of those categories, so metaphysics and epistemology. And so ethics is kind of in the discussion because it's all linked together. Um, it's linked with reality and knowledge, but the information that I'm going to present here is going to deal more primarily with uh, truth and knowledge and reality, not so much on the ethical side of things. And so the question for this episode really is, what is truth and how do we come to know things that are true? Um, so the first question asks about the very nature of truth itself. What is truth? And then the second question asks, how do we know whether or not something is true or not? And also, a lot of the information that I'm going to be going over is from this book that I'm holding. It is called the Bible Based Worldview, and that is by Joel Sedekase, who I've had on the show as well. He runs the Think Institute. He also has another channel called Think Debates, and that's primarily where he streams debates, live debates, or things that are pre-recorded or not pre-recorded, but things that were recorded during a live debate that he posted after the fact, or however that works. But um, he's awesome. I love Joel. He's got so much good stuff online. But this book was really cool. There's a lot of information packed into a small volume, and honestly, there's probably a lot more that could have been said in the book, and I'm sure he knows that, and probably could have done that. But it does the job of driving the point home. As you can see, it is not a very big book. It is pretty short, and maybe let's see here. It is in total, actual reading pages is probably like 112 pages, and it was pretty cheap online. So I would recommend it. I'd recommend getting that one. It's good. I enjoyed it. But before we get into it, before we start with truth, I think we have to start with knowledge, and they're linked together. Now you can't know something to be true unless you have knowledge of that thing. So what is knowledge? Now, if we had to give a definition, the best way to understand it would be to say that it is justified true belief or warranted true belief as articulated by the prominent Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga. Alvin Plantinga said he likes to explain knowledge as warranted true belief. To say you have warrant to believe something is to say you have a good reason for the belief that you have. So the questions of knowledge have been debated deeply and thought about for a very long time. And I'm going to cover three epistemological frameworks to give a better idea as to what I'm talking about. These three theories of knowledge are very popular, hence why I think it would be helpful to talk about them. Now, the first of the three is known as empiricism. Empiricism teaches that true knowledge comes from scientific observation. You collect information or data, and then you analyze that data, and then you come to conclusions based on your observations. Empiricists value sense data. That is basically to look at their scientific data through sense perception. So, sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing, all of that. All of that is how they observe the data that they've gotten through their experimentation. And now, this framework assumes that your senses in your truth seeking faculties are reliable. So, truth seeking faculties would be mental tools that we use to discover truth. Things like logic, observation, curiosity, intellectual humility, um, all of that. And so the way that they observe the data would assume that all of those things are firing correctly. It assumes that they are reliable. Now, I'm not really giving so much a critique on these. I'm just kind of explaining what they are so that if and when you hear them, if somebody tells you that they're an empiricist or something like that, you'll have an understanding of what that means. What are they saying when they say they're an empiricist? Now, the second epistemology is known as rationalism. Rationalism is based on certain principles that we know apart from our own experience or sense data. So, some knowledge can be known apart from our experience and sense perception. Now, this one is a very high view of human reasoning. Senses are useful tools, but they are insufficient for foundational knowledge. It acknowledges that the senses and our emotions can be wrong and they can lead to wrong conclusions. The ultimate foundation for knowledge within rationalism is the autonomous self. It is autonomous human reasoning. Now, the third one I want to mention is known as subjectivism. I think this one is actually really common, especially in our postmodern culture. It teaches that knowledge of any absolute truth is impossible. So we can really only ever know what is true for ourselves. This kind of thought is where statements like that's your truth or that's true for you but not for me, that's where those types of lines of thinking come from. So truth comes from internal processes and not a process that can be verified by any kind of reasoning or scientific experiment that exists outside of the subject. Now, none of these epistemologies, none of these theories of knowledge by themselves are complete. They're all useful systems, but none of them can actually stand on their own. And anyone who claims to hold to any one of these systems is inconsistent. Joel Sedekase, in his book, he says, an empiricist will not only use his five senses to interact with the world, he will use reason, and there will be some knowledge he simply intuits. Likewise, the rationalist will find himself just knowing certain things he cannot prove rationally and will surely value some scientific discoveries. And no one is a true subjectivist when crossing a busy street. Now, I agree. An empiricist can't begin to use their sense data or use scientific observation without reasoning about both of those things. A rationalist just knows certain things without having to reason about those things. For instance, if he hears his neighbor screaming bloody murder in the middle of the night, his moral intuition will kick in and he will know something is wrong, and hopefully he'll call the cops. And yes, no one is truly a subjectivist when crossing a busy street. You don't say, well, it's true for you that there's a semi truck barreling down the road, but not for me, and then proceed to cross the street. Everybody who claims to be a subjectivist is going to look both ways before crossing the street. And that's because it doesn't matter if they believe or not that there is a car coming. It's not true for just for them or just for somebody else that there's a car coming, and they'll soon find out that if they say that it's only true for you that a car is coming, and they walk out into the street, they'll realize very quickly that that was also true for them. Um, so it's funny. I work with a guy who oftentimes he makes claims that make me think that he's probably more of a subjectivist. I've never I've never asked him, his actual position or like theory of knowledge. I don't know that he would even be able to label it, but for instance, we work in a dangerous environment. It's a very dangerous job. I work with high voltage power lines, and he oftentimes says things like, everything is made up, or even sentiments like I said before, that's your truth. Now, I guarantee he would never say, well, it's your truth that if you grab that 12,000-volt line and then go ground yourself, you'd get electrocuted. He wouldn't dare try that himself because he knows that that's true for him too. Because it's objectively true that if you ground yourself to a power line, uh, it's not going to end well. So, you know, it's just funny. You can hear these types of things just kind of in everyday speech. It doesn't even have to be in the context of um, religious conversation, right? So how should a Christian view these things? Well, like I said before, all of these in and of themselves they are incomplete, but we shouldn't shy away from aspects of these systems um, of basically systems of thought as tools. They're all great things that God has given us. We can use empirical data and observation. Science is great in a valid way of learning and gaining knowledge. Um, all of the first scientists or the fathers of scientific disciplines were all Christians, and that's how they understood it. Is that they were able to reason and use scientific observation and experimentation because they had knowledge from God. They were able to put those things together. Um, so again, they were Christians and they understood that. They rightly knew how to apply empirical data to the Christian epistemological system. So s- something like rationalism in and of itself is false, but using reason is a good thing. Same with empiricism, like we just talked about. As a system itself, it's false, but using empirical data is a good thing. And subjectivism as well is false, but intuition and personal preference are good things within reason, of course. Um, Now, we also agree with rationalists on the emphasis of the importance of logic and reason. Logic and reason are ways that we can think God's thoughts after him. Those things are extensions of God's being and character. Logic and reason are possible because the Christian worldview is true. God's revelation is that's how we integrate all of these systems. So his very revelation is how we integrate all of these concepts and these systems. We can look at all three epistemologies as perspectives on truth because God's revelation ties them all together and allows us to make sense of those things. God has spoken to us through his revelation, which is his word, the Bible. And through that, he has revealed to us who he is, the truth about himself, which is where we find ultimate reality. And he has revealed all of creation and the truth about ourselves and who we are in relation to him and what our identity should be and all of those things. We don't have like exhaustive knowledge, but we have truth, and true knowledge begins with God, right? So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, Proverbs 1:7. And so we have truth from God, and because of that truth, we are able to obtain and gain more knowledge about life. Now, there are two ways that God reveals himself to us. One of those ways I already mentioned is known as special revelation, which is how he reveals himself to us in his word. He has revealed himself to us through his word, the Bible. The other is general revelation, which is what God has revealed to all men by their observation of the world around them and through self reflection, which displays the image of God in all of us. So the world all around us screams that God exists. Romans 1:18 through 20. It says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." It is clear that God exists just simply by looking at the world around you, and then by looking inside of yourself and seeing that you have a conscience and you know right from wrong. You use logic and reason and all of those things. All of those are reflections of the image of God in you. And just to drive general revelation home, Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." So anybody can look around and they can see God's handiwork. They can look around and they can see that God exists. It is very clear. And God's word is articulating that. So people don't lack evidence or knowledge of God. They have all that they need. They have all of that. They're suppressing what they know to be true in accordance with their sinful, fallen nature, where the spirit is constantly warring against the flesh. So unbelievers run from God for the same reason that criminals run from the cops, because they are guilty. The difference is that you can't actually run from God. It's really only going to last so long before you face him. I don't know if you guys know this, but 10 out of 10 people die. It's just statistically true. Well, 100% of people will die. Death doesn't discriminate. Okay. It doesn't let some people slide. It comes for everyone. And when that time comes, judgment follows. 2 Corinthians 5:8 says, "Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord." Now, that's written by believers. So for them to be absent from their body means that they are present with the Lord in eternity. So for them, that's a good thing. And it's not something that they need to fear, because they have the forgiveness of Christ. They've turned to Christ. They're walking with Christ. They live for Christ. They've repented. They have their sins covered by Christ. And so for them to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. But for the unbeliever, their time with the Lord, uh, once they depart this life, will be very short lived, and only in the context of eternal judgment that they have brought on themselves. So the period of the time with the Lord that they have is going to be, um, it's going to be eternal judgment. It's going to be damnation brought onto them. And that is something that they've brought on themselves because they have denied Christ. Hebrews 9:27, it says, "And just as it is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes judgment." So we die, and comes judgment right after that. Now, for the unbeliever, there's something known as the second death. That is the death brought on to them after their physical death. And that refers to the judgment of eternally being separated from the goodness of God. And so now there's so much, so much more, so much more could be said on all of these things. But these episodes, especially the ones that I do by myself, are never really truly exhaustive, simply because I don't have the time in the week to prepare all of that really could go into these. I mean, honestly, this topic could have way more than just one episode. So, um, but there's plenty of guys online that talk about these things. Eli Ayala of Revealed Apologetics and Joel Sedekase of the um, Think Institute. Jeff Durbin, the Apologia guys. There's a ton of lectures and things like that from Greg Bonson on the Apologia site. I mean, it's never ending. You can get so much information on this stuff. But this episode, I just kind of wanted to share some of the things found or learned in this book that I read by Joel Sedekase, and he does go on in his book to expand much more deeply on these epistemologies. And how they don't work on their own, and how they presuppose God. And he gets into that. But for the purposes of this episode, it was to kind of just briefly talk about these epistemologies, um, maybe give like some short critiques on them, but nothing in depth, but just kind of explaining what they are so that you can recognize them when you're in conversation with somebody, or maybe you can even ask them, um, you know, excuse me. You could even ask them like what their foundation is for knowledge. You don't have to say, "Well, what's your epistemology?" Like most people don't know what that means, so don't do that. But just ask them, how do you know anything? Like, how do you know anything at all? What is your starting point for knowledge? And you'll probably soon realize that it's probably one of those three. It could be, I guess, something else, or maybe a mix of those things. But you'll probably find that um, there are people that you'll meet that are either empiricists or rationalists or subjectivists, and so now you have a little bit of a framework to understand what those things are, and how you can go about those things. So maybe in a follow-up episode I will kind of dive deeper into those concepts, those epistemologies, and maybe I'll give more of an in-depth critique of why each one of them doesn't work on their own. But again, Joel, if you're interested, I would pick that book up. As I said in the beginning, The Bible-Based Worldview by Joel Sedekase. um, he gets into that stuff. God is rational for, or he's required for the rational mind, or understanding and interpreting empirical data, or subjective experience or knowledge having any meaning at all. Again, I just don't have time, especially today, to get into all of those points. But this information, I think, will suffice for the purpose of this episode. So if you're interested in that topic, again, pick up that book, or look up many of those other channels that I have um, put out there, for you. And I'm sure you'll find all kinds of great stuff out there. But again, hopefully I can do more on this subject um, a little bit later on. I do have a lot of really cool interviews lined up. I don't want to put any of the names out there quite yet, because some of them I don't have confirmed yet. Um, Well, one that I do have confirmed right now, I think for October, is Dr. Jason Lyle. He will be back on, and we're going to be talking about his book. He has a new book out that's all about God's law and what does that look like in civil government, and how's that supposed to play into all those things. So keep an eye out for that. But there are some other cool ones coming up, and some great discussions, I'm sure, that we will have on this channel. So keep an eye out, and I hope you were blessed by this episode. And brothers and sisters, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Always be ready to give a reason for the hope that is in you, and to do that lovingly and with respect. I will see you next time.